In the unforgiving heart of the Arizona Territory, where dust and sorrow settled in equal measure, a lone woman's act of mercy became a declaration of war. Jasmine O'Connell, a widow clutching the deeds to a failing ranch, and the memory of a husband stolen by violence, opened her door during a monsoon to a man bleeding out his last breaths. He was an outlaw, a devil with a gunshot wound, and the law on his heels. But in her desolate world, he was just a man in need. She offered him shelter. In return, he offered her a promise, a vow forged in pain and fever, to make her his forever. This is the story of how that vow nearly buried them both. The August monsoon didn't just rain on the Broken Spur Ranch, it waged war. Thunder rattled the very bones of the small adobe house Jasmine O'Connell had built with her late husband Liam. Each flash of lightning threw the harsh, angular landscape into stark relief, the skeletal arms of saguaro cacti, the jagged teeth of the distant Dragoon Mountains, and the endless, unforgiving expanse of dust that was slowly swallowing her dreams. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and loneliness. Her 5-year-old son, Daniel, slept soundly in his small room, oblivious to the storm and the heavier tempest raging in his mother's heart. It had been a year since the sheriff had ridden out to tell her Liam wasn't coming home, his wagon found splintered, and his body left for the coyotes, all for the paltry sum he'd gotten for their last cattle sale. A year of staring at his empty chair of mending clothes that would never again be worn, of fighting a losing battle against drought debt, and the predatory gaze of neighboring cattle baron Wendell Price, who wanted her land more than he wanted salvation. Jasmine was cleaning Liam's Colt Peacemaker, the familiar weight a cold comfort in her hands, when a frantic pounding on the door nearly made her drop it. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a desperate, primal drumming that was almost lost in the roar of the wind and rain. Her heart hammered against her ribs. No one came to the Broken Spur after dark, especially not in a storm like this. It could be Price's men trying to spook her off the land. It could be Apache raiders, though they rarely ventured this close to the town of Redemption Peak anymore. Clutching the heavy revolver, she crept to the door, her bare feet silent on the cool floorboards. "Who's there?" She called out, her voice steadier than she felt. A ragged groan was her only answer, followed by a slumping sound. Against her better judgment, fueled by a flicker of the same compassion that had always been her strength and her weakness, she lifted the heavy wooden bar and cracked the door open a few inches. Sprawled on her porch, half drowned in the mud, and the downpour, was a man. His face was a mask of dirt and blood, his clothes shredded and soaked through. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across his left side, just below the ribs. He was breathing in shallow, hitching gasps, his eyes clenched shut in agony. One hand was still feebly gripping the doorframe, the knuckles white. He looked less like a man, and more like a piece of wreckage the storm had coughed up. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door, bar it, and pretend she'd seen nothing. This was trouble of the highest order, the kind that got solitary widows and their young sons killed. He had the lean, hard, bitten look of a man who lived by the gun. A worn leather holster was tied low on his hip, the pistol within it slick with rain. An outlaw, no doubt. The very sort of man who might have put the bullet in Liam. She should have closed the door. She knew it. But then his eyes fluttered open. They were a startling, pale grey like a winter sky, and for a fleeting moment they held not malice, but a desperate animal plea. It was the look of a creature caught in a trap, knowing the end was near. "Please!" He rasped the word, a ghost of a sound. "Just water." And in that moment she didn't see an outlaw. She didn't see a threat. She saw a dying man on her doorstep, and the memory of finding Liam cold and alone flooded her senses. No one deserved to die like that. No one. "Get inside," she commanded, her voice sharp, with a decision that felt both insane and profoundly right. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she hooked her arms under his and dragged his dead weight across the threshold. He was heavier than he looked, all wiry muscle and bone. She managed to get him onto the rag rug just inside the door, where he promptly collapsed, leaving a muddy, bloody trail from the porch. She barred the door again, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the storm's percussion. Daniel stirred in his room, calling out, "Mama!" "It's just the storm, sweet boy," she called back, her voice miraculously calm. "Go back to sleep." She knelt beside the stranger, the lantern light casting flickering shadows across his face. He had a strong jawline, hidden under a scruff of dark beard, and his hair plastered to his skull with rain, and sweat was the color of coal. He looked to be around 30, a man forged in the crucible of a hard life. The wound in his side was a ragged, angry hole, oozing blood that was far too dark. An exit wound on his back was even worse. Jasmine wasn't a doctor, but she was a rancher's wife. She had set broken bones on calves, stitched up gashes on horses, and tended to more than one of Liam's injuries. Gritting her teeth, she fetched the whiskey-clean rags and her sewing kit. This was going to be a long night. As she cut away the ruined fabric of his shirt, a glint of metal caught her eye. It was a silver medallion on a leather cord, bearing the image of a hawk in flight. It was a small personal detail that made him seem impossibly human. As she poured raw whiskey onto the wound, he screamed a raw guttural sound that was swallowed by the thunder. His body arched in agony, and for a terrifying second his hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his fingers like a steel vice. The strength in that grip was astonishing, a testament to the power he held even on the brink of death. His grey eyes, wild with pain, locked onto hers. "Don't you die on me!" she hissed, her face inches from his. "You hear me? You don't get to die in my house." The fire in his eyes seemed to dim, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. He relaxed his grip, his head falling back against the floor with a thud. He had passed out. For the rest of the night, as the storm raged outside, Jasmine O'Connell fought a different kind of war. She cleaned the wound, dug out a piece of lead with the tip of a sterilized knife, and stitched the flesh together with clumsy but firm sutures. She forced water and broth between his lips when he was conscious enough to swallow, and held him down during his feverish thrashing. She was terrified, exhausted, and running on pure grit. She had invited the devil in from the storm, and now she had to keep him alive. She had no idea she was also sealing her own fate. The storm passed, leaving the desert scrubbed clean and glistening under a piercingly blue sky. But inside the O'Connell homestead, the storm had moved into the blood of the stranger. For 3 days he was lost to a brutal fever. Jasmine barely slept, moving like a ghost, between her chores, tending to Daniel, and keeping a constant vigil by the man's side. She moved him from the floor to her own bed, a decision that felt both pragmatic and alarmingly intimate. During his delirium, fragments of his life broke free. He spoke in hoarse whispers, his words painting a violent tapestry of dust-choked chases, smoky saloons, and the sharp crack of gunfire. He muttered names: Bo Jericho, the Red Creek, and places Socorro Verde Canyon. He called out for someone named Patrick, his voice filled with a desperate, boyish anguish. Jasmine listened, piecing together the jagged narrative of a life lived on the run. He was part of a gang, that much was clear. The Red Creek Gang. She'd heard the name whispered in town, always linked to bank robberies and stagecoach ambushes. She learned his name on the second day. In a rare moment of lucidity, his fever-bright eyes focused on her. "Clay," he breathed. "Cole Corrigan. They call me Clay." "Rest, Clay," she'd said, pressing a cool, damp cloth to his forehead. "Save your strength." Doc Hemlock came on the 4th day. Jasmine had ridden the 5 miles to Redemption Peak at dawn, leaving Daniel with strict instructions not to go near the bedroom. The doctor was a gruff, silver-haired man with kind eyes and a strict policy of not asking questions he didn't want the answers to. He examined the outlaw, his face a grim mask. "Stitching's rough as a cob, but it's holding." He grunted, probing the inflamed wound. "You got the bullet out. That's what saved him. Infection's the enemy now." He looked at Jasmine, his gaze sharp. "This is a gunshot wound, Jasmine, the kind Sheriff Brody ought to know about." "He'll die if he's moved." Jasmine stated her chin, set in a stubborn line. "And he'll hang if the sheriff finds him." Doc Hemlock sighed a long, weary sound. "Liam was a good man. He wouldn't want to see you mixed up in this. Liam taught me to help folks in need, no matter who they are." She countered the lie, tasting like ash in her mouth. Liam would have told her to shoot the man where he lay. But Liam was gone, and she was here. The doctor relented, leaving her with a pouch of willow bark for the fever and a bottle of carbolic acid for the wound. "You're playing with fire, girl," he warned as he left. "This kind of man, his past will come looking for him, and it won't knock politely." The fever broke on the 5th day. Clay woke to find Jasmine asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head slumped forward, her face etched with exhaustion. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the world wasn't a swirling nightmare of pain. He felt weak, hollowed out, but he was alive. He watched her for a long time. He saw the faint lines of worry around her eyes, the strength in the set of her jaw even in sleep. He saw the calluses on her hands, the faded patch on her dress. This woman had saved him. A complete stranger. She had dragged him from the jaws of death for no reason other than a compassion he hadn't encountered since his own mother died. When she finally stirred, and her deep brown eyes met his, a profound silence settled between them. "You're awake," she said simply, her voice husky with sleep. "Thanks to you." He rasped his throat raw. "I owe you my life, Mom. My name is Jasmine." "Jasmine." He repeated the name feeling solid on his tongue. "Why?" She understood the question immediately. "Because you were a man in need. It's not for me to be your judge." Over the next 2 weeks, Clay began a slow, arduous recovery. He was a difficult patient, restless, proud, and unaccustomed to being cared for. But he was also observant. He watched the relentless rhythm of her life, rising before dawn, to milk the lone cow tending her meager vegetable garden, mending Daniel's clothes, her face a constant mask of weary determination. He saw the worry in her eyes when she looked towards the long track leading to the main road, and the fear when a rider passed in the distance. Daniel, her son, was a small, serious boy with his mother's dark eyes. At first he was wary of the stranger in his mother's bed. But Clay, accustomed to the rough camaraderie of outlaws, had a quiet way with the boy. He showed him how to carve a piece of scrap wood into a surprisingly realistic horse with a pocket knife. He told him stories not of robberies and gunfights, but of tracking jackrabbits in the high desert and the way stars looked from a mountain peak. A fragile, tentative bond began to form. One evening, Jasmine was sitting on the porch, staring out at the sunset, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Clay, leaning heavily on a carved stick, came to stand in the doorway behind her. "This is a hard place, for a woman alone." he said, his voice quiet. "It's my home," she replied, not turning around. "Liam, my husband, he poured his soul into this dirt. It's all I have left of him. He's the one." Clay started, then trailed off, gesturing vaguely towards the small fenced-off grave on a nearby hillock. Jasmine nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Road agents, a year ago." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Clay knew what kind of men road agents were. He was one of them. The irony was a bitter pill. This woman whose husband was murdered by men like him had saved his life. He limped over and sat on the steps near her, the wood groaning under his weight. "When I was lying on your porch," he said, his voice low and intense, "I was ready to die. I'd made my peace with it. But you wouldn't let me. You fought for me. A stranger. A man who deserved to be left in the rain." He looked at her, then his grey eyes burning with an emotion she couldn't name. It was more than gratitude. It was something fiercer, something possessive. "I can't ever repay that debt, Jasmine. A life for a life. But I can swear this on my own soul." He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "No one will ever harm you or that boy again. Not Wendell Price, not the drought, not God himself. As long as I'm breathing, I'll stand between you and whatever comes. I'll make this place safe. I'll make you mine to protect. I swear it." Jasmine stared at him, her heart pounding. It wasn't a proposal of marriage. It was something far more primal. It was the vow of a wolf pledging himself to the sheep who had tended his wounds. It was terrifying, and in the desolate loneliness of her life, strangely, dangerously comforting. She had offered a dying outlaw shelter. He had just sworn to make her his forever. With the passing weeks, Clay's vow took on the form of relentless hard work. His body healed, and the wiry strength returned to his limbs. He moved out of her bed and into the small, dusty bunk in the barn, a respectful distance that Jasmine was both grateful for and, to her own confusion, slightly disappointed by. He shed the moniker of patient and became an indispensable part of the broken spur. The man was a paradox. His hands, which were so deft with a pistol, were equally skilled at mending a broken fence post. He moved with a predator's grace, whether he was tracking a stray calf or stalking across the yard, yet he spoke to Daniel with a gentle patience that soothed the boy's quiet nature. He repaired the leaky roof of the barn, dug a new irrigation ditch from the well to Jasmine's wilting garden, and reinforced the corral until it was stronger than it had ever been under Liam's care. He worked from sunup to sundown, driven by a silent, ferocious energy, as if he could physically build a fortress against the past with his bare hands. Jasmine found herself watching him, her emotions a tangled mess of gratitude, fear, and a burgeoning attraction she refused to acknowledge. He was handsome in a rugged, weather-beaten way. When he worked, stripped to the waist under the brutal Arizona sun, his back was a road map of old scars, a knife wound here, a puckered circle from an old bullet there. Each mark told a story she didn't want to know, but the sight of his lean muscle and quiet competence stirred something in her that had been dormant since Liam's death. Their evenings fell into a comfortable routine. After Daniel was asleep, they would sit on the porch, the silence companionable. She would mend clothes by lamplight. He would clean his colt with meticulous care. Sometimes they talked. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the son of a sharecropper, and of a younger brother, Patrick, lost to consumption. He never spoke directly of his outlaw life, but alluded to it in veiled terms of bad choices, of falling in with the wrong crowd, and of a man named Beau Garrett, a name he uttered with a mixture of old loyalty and fresh hatred. The first shadow of the past fell on a Tuesday. Sheriff Brody rode out to the ranch. He was a decent man, but worn down by the vast, lawless territory he was meant to tame. "Afternoon, Jasmine," he said, tipping his hat as he swung down from his horse. His eyes scanned the ranch, noting the repairs, and settled on Clay, who was calmly replacing a horseshoe on Jasmine's mare. "Sheriff!" Jasmine greeted him, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart starting a low, anxious drumbeat. "Heard you hired some help," Brody said, his gaze fixed on Clay. "Don't recognize him." "This is Clay," Jasmine said, her voice even. "A drifter. Needed work." Clay straightened up slowly, his movements casual, but Jasmine could see the tension in his shoulders. He met the sheriff's gaze without flinching. "Sheriff," he nodded, his voice a low drawl. "There was a botched bank job over in Silver Creek a month back," Brody said, his eyes never leaving Clay's face. "The Red Creek gang. One of them was shot up, pretty bad, but got away. Left a trail of blood heading this direction before the rains washed it out. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Clay?" The air crackled with tension. Jasmine felt the blood drain from her face. "Can't say that I do," Clay replied smoothly, his expression unreadable. "I came down from the north through the territories, just looking for an honest day's pay for an honest day's work." Sheriff Brody stared at him for a long, hard moment. Then his gaze shifted to Jasmine. He saw her pale face, the slight tremor in her hands. He saw the new security of the ranch, the way she stood a little too close to this stranger. Brody wasn't a fool, but he also knew Jasmine O'Connell's character. He decided for now to let it be. "Well, you see any strangers, you let me know," he said, turning back to his horse. "The Baron's got a temper. He'll want his man back or what he was carrying." "The Baron?" Jasmine asked, her voice thin. "Beau Garrett. Calls himself the Baron," Brody explained. "He runs the Red Creek gang. Vain, vicious son of a bitch. They say he's as charming as a preacher and as deadly as a rattlesnake." After the sheriff left, a heavy silence hung between Jasmine and Clay. The name Beau Garrett was no longer a vague whisper from Clay's past. It was a tangible threat with a face and a reputation. The encounter changed things. The fragile piece of their domestic routine was shattered. Clay became more vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He began to teach Jasmine how to shoot, not just with her rifle, but with Liam's Colt. His lessons were impersonal and brutally efficient. "Don't aim for the man, aim for the center button on his shirt," he instructed her, his hands covering hers to adjust her grip, his touch sending an unwanted jolt through her. "Don't hesitate. The man who hesitates is the man who dies. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull it." One person who shared the sheriff's suspicion was Finn McAllister, her closest neighbor and Liam's old friend. A stout, balding man with an honest heart and a stubborn streak, Finn had been helping her out since Liam's death, his affection for Jasmine barely concealed. He saw Clay not as a savior, but as a viper she'd welcomed into her home. "I don't like him, Jasmine," Finn told her one day, his voice low and urgent as he helped her load feed into her wagon. "There's a darkness in him. I see the way he watches you. It ain't right. He's a hard worker, Finn. He's protected us. From what he is the what. Men like that, they don't just appear. They're running from something, and whatever it is, it's gonna find him right here on your land, with you and Daniel in the crossfire." His words were a cold spike of fear in her gut, because she knew he was right. She was living on borrowed time. Every sunset felt less like a promise of a new day, and more like one less day of peace before the shadows of Clay's past finally caught up to them all. The whisper arrived before the man. It traveled on the tongues of freighters and prospectors, a rumor that coiled around the town of Redemption Peak like a snake. Beau Garrett and the Red Creek gang were in the territory. They weren't robbing or shooting, not yet. They were searching, asking quiet questions in dusty saloons and general stores, their inquiries always circling back to the same subject, a man wounded who had vanished into the monsoon rains about 2 months back. A man named Clay Corrigan. Then one blistering afternoon, the whisper became a reality. 4 riders trotted into Redemption Peak, their horses kicking up plumes of fine alkali dust. They were led by a man who seemed to have stepped from a different world. While his men were grimy, hard-faced killers, their leader rode tall and straight on a magnificent black stallion. He wore a tailored black coat, a clean white shirt, and a silver brocade vest. His face was handsome with a charming smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. This was Beau, the Baron, Garrett. He didn't tear the town apart. His approach was far more insidious. He bought a round of drinks for everyone at the saloon, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that was completely at odds with his profession. He paid the blacksmith triple the going rate to reshoe his horses. He tipped his hat to the ladies and charmed the town elders with talk of politics and investment. But beneath the veneer of civility, a current of pure menace flowed. His men particularly, a hulking, silent brute named Jericho, moved through the town with a quiet arrogance, their eyes missing nothing. The news reached the Broken Spur via Doc Hemlock, who rode out under the pretense of checking on Jasmine's cow. His face was grave. "He's in town, Jasmine," he said, keeping his voice low as Clay worked at the far end of the corral. "Garrett, he's asking about Clay, by name." Jasmine felt a cold dread seep into her bones. "What did you say?" "I said the name meant nothing to me. But he's a sharp one. He's offering a reward. $500 in gold for information on Corrigan's whereabouts. That kind of money will make honest men forget their principles." When the doctor left, Jasmine walked over to Clay. She didn't have to say a word. He had seen the look on the doctor's face. "He's here," Clay stated. It wasn't a question. "In town," she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. "He's asking for you." Clay slammed the hammer he was holding against a fence post, the crack of wood echoing in the still air. For the first time, Jasmine saw not just vigilance in his eyes, but a raw, hunted fear. "You and the boy need to pack," he said, his voice tight. "Ride to Finn McAllister's place. Don't stop for anything. And what about you? I'm what he wants. I'll lead him away from here. Head south into Mexico." "No." Jasmine said the word coming out with a surprising force. "This is my home. I'm not running from it." "Jasmine, you don't understand," he snarled, turning on her, his face a mask of desperation. "This isn't some common trail thug. Beau is a different animal. He'll burn this place to the ground, with you and Daniel inside just to make a point. He enjoys it." "Then we'll fight him," she said, her own fear making her stubborn. "Here." His laugh was a short, bitter bark. "With what an old rifle and a peacemaker against him and his men, that's not a fight, that's a goddamn slaughter." That night, the tension in the small house was so thick it felt hard to breathe. Jasmine put Daniel to bed, her hands trembling as she tucked the blankets around him. Clay sat at the table, disassembling and reassembling his colt with practiced, frantic motions. The comforting domesticity of their evenings was gone, replaced by the grim atmosphere of a war council. "Why is he so desperate to find you?" Jasmine finally asked, sitting across from him. "It's not just about loyalty to his gang." Clay stopped his work, staring down at the intricate metal parts spread across the table. "Before the bank job in Silver Creek, we hit an army payroll wagon, a big one, more gold than any of us had ever seen. It was Beau's plan, perfect as always. But it went wrong. Pinkertons showed up out of nowhere." He looked up, his grey eyes haunted. There was a shootout. We got away, but half the gang was dead. We had to stash the gold before the posse caught up. We buried it, and I was the one who drew the map. The map, Jasmine breathed. It's not just a drawing, it's memorized. Landmarks, paces, rock formations, all of it. He tapped his temple. Up here, I'm the only one left who knows the spot. Bo thinks I ran out on him, that I was going to come back for it myself. That's why he shot me and left me for dead. He thought the secret would die with me. Now she understood. It wasn't about a wounded outlaw, it was about a fortune. Bo Garrett hadn't come to the territory for revenge. He'd come for a key, and that key was currently sitting in her kitchen. He won't stop, Clay said, his voice flat and devoid of hope. He'll tear this entire county apart, stone by stone, until he finds me. And he'll find me. From his post in town, the Baron continued his patient siege. He learned about the reclusive widow at the Broken Spur Ranch, a woman who had lost her husband to outlaws. He learned she'd been struggling until a mysterious drifter showed up and turned the place around. He heard the whispers about Sheriff Brody's visit. Bo Garrett was a master strategist, a collector of information. He gathered these disparate threads of gossip and began to weave them into a tapestry. And at the center of that tapestry, he saw the face of Cole Clay Corrigan. He smiled his charming, deadly smile. It was time he decided to pay the grieving widow a visit. The breaking point didn't come from Bo Garrett. It came from Finn McAllister. Driven by a desperate need to protect Jasmine, he rode out to the Broken Spur 2 days after Garrett's arrival in town. He found Jasmine and Clay reinforcing the door to the small house with a new heavy wooden beam. The sight of them working together, a picture of grim domestic unity, set Finn's teeth on edge. "Jasmine, I need a word," he said, dismounting, his voice strained. He ignored Clay completely. "Alone." Jasmine glanced at Clay, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before moving back towards the barn. She led Finn to the shade of the porch. "He has to go," Finn said. Without preamble, his face flushed with emotion. "Now, Garrett is in town asking for him. Everyone knows it. You're harboring a wanted man, a member of the Red Creek gang. They'll hang him, Jasmine, and they'll see you as an accomplice. I can't just turn him out, Finn. He's—" She struggled for the right word. "He's helped us. Helped you, or put a target on your back." Finn's voice rose in frustration. "For God's sake, Jasmine, think of Daniel. This man, this killer, he's the same kind that took Liam from us." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. From inside the barn where he was pretending to mend a harness, Clay heard everyone. Finn's accusation struck him with the force of a physical blow, the same kind that took Liam. Jasmine's face crumpled. "That's not fair, Finn. Isn't it? What do you really know about him?" "Nothing. He's a shadow, a ghost with a gunshot wound." My God, for all you know, he could have been there that day with the men who killed Liam. The accusation was meant to be hyperbole, a desperate attempt to make her see reason. But for Clay, listening in the shadows, it was a lit fuse. He couldn't let her believe that. Not that. He stepped out of the barn, his face pale and set like stone. Finn spun around his hand, instinctively dropping to the handle of the hunting knife on his belt. "He's right," Clay said, his voice ragged. "You don't know anything about me." He looked directly at Jasmine, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "You deserve the truth." "Clay, no," she whispered, sensing they were on the precipice of something terrible. But it was too late. The dam of his secrets had broken. "I need you to listen," he said, turning his back on Finn and focusing solely on her. "Everything I've told you is true. My name, my past, the gold. But I left something out. He took a deep breath, the confession tearing its way out of him. The day your husband was killed, the Red Creek gang was in this area. We had just hidden the army payroll. We were on our way back to our camp when a lone wagon came up the trail. A rancher. Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She knew what was coming. Bo doesn't like witnesses. Clay continued, his voice cracking. He told Jericho to handle it. I tried to stop him. I told him to just take the man's money and let him go. But Bo gave the order. He said no loose ends. He couldn't look at her anymore. He stared at the ground, at the dust Liam O'Connell had once worked. I didn't pull the trigger, Jasmine. I swear on my brother's grave I never laid a hand on him. But I was there. I was part of it. I stood by while my gang, my leader, murdered your husband for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from Jasmine's lungs. The man she had saved, the man who had rebuilt her fences and carved toys for her son, the man whose presence had become a strange, solid comfort in her empty life, was an accomplice to her husband's murder. Finn's wild accusation had become an unspeakable truth. Finn McAllister let out a roar of pure rage and lunged at Clay, drawing his knife, but Clay, even burdened by guilt, moved with the speed of a cougar. He sidestepped the clumsy attack, grabbing Finn's wrist and twisting it until the knife clattered to the ground. He shoved the older man back, sending him stumbling into the dirt. "Get out of here, Finn!" Clay growled, his face a mask of anguish and fury. "This is between me and her." Finn scrambled to his feet, his face a mess of confusion and hatred. He looked from Clay's tormented face to Jasmine's, which was white with shock tears streaming down her cheeks. He backed away slowly, then turned and ran for his horse, riding away, as if the devil himself was at his heels. Jasmine and Clay were left alone in the suffocating silence. She stared at him, seeing him for the first time. The kindness in his eyes was now a lie. The vow he had made to her was a mockery, a penance, for a sin she hadn't even known he'd committed. He hadn't been protecting her from the world. He had been hiding from his part in destroying hers. "You let me touch you," she whispered, her voice trembling with a grief so profound it was almost silent. "You let me care for you. You slept in my husband's bed." "Jasmine," he began, taking a step towards her, his hand outstretched. "Don't!" She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, raw and broken. She backed away from him, as if he were poison. "Don't you ever touch me again!" She stumbled back towards the house, her body shaking uncontrollably. All the while, her mind replayed his words, "I was there." The man she had saved was inextricably linked to the greatest tragedy of her life. Her act of mercy felt like the ultimate betrayal of Liam's memory. She slammed the door in Clay's face, and through the heavy bar, the sound echoing the final, brutal closing of the door on her heart. Outside, Clay Corrigan stood alone, under the vast, indifferent sky, a man condemned not by a hangman's noose, but by the truth. And in the distance, unknowingly, 3 riders were making their way up the long, dusty track to the Broken Spur Ranch. The Baron was coming to collect his key. Jasmine collapsed against the barred door, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. The trust she had so tentatively placed in Clay had been shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Every kind word, every shared glance, every act of service now seemed like a calculated deceit, a way to ease a guilty conscience. Daniel, awakened by her scream, came out of his room, his small face clouded with worry. "Mama, what's wrong?" She scooped him into her arms, holding him so tightly he squirmed. "Nothing, baby. Everything's fine." She lied, burying her face in his hair, the familiar scent of her son, a small anchor in a swirling sea of betrayal and despair. Outside, Clay stood frozen, the sound of the bar sliding into place, a final judgment. He had known the truth would destroy them, but the reality of her pain was a physical weight crushing the air from his lungs. He was a dead man. If Bo didn't kill him, this guilt surely would. It was the glint of the sun on metal in the distance that snapped him out of his stupor. 3 riders still a mile out, but moving with purpose. He didn't need a spyglass to know who it was. Bo Jericho and probably one other. The Baron had grown impatient. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through his misery. He ran to the door, pounding on it with his fist. "Jasmine, Jasmine, open the door. He's here. Garrett is coming." Inside. Jasmine froze. She looked through the small window beside the door and saw them 3 dark specks growing larger against the pale backdrop of the desert. The final storm had arrived. "Jasmine, please." Clay's voice was raw with desperation. "I know you hate me. You have every right. But you have to let me in. I can't protect you and the boy from out here." Her mind was a battlefield. One part of her, the wounded, betrayed part, wanted to leave him out there to face his master alone. But another more pragmatic part, the mother knew he was their only chance. She and Daniel would be caught in the crossfire regardless. With a trembling hand, she lifted the bar. The door swung open, and Clay stumbled inside, his eyes wild. He didn't look at her, couldn't bear to meet her gaze. His focus was entirely on survival. "The rifle!" He snapped his voice, all command. "Get it, and Liam's Colt, all the ammunition you have. Daniel, get in your room under the bed, and do not come out. Not for any reason. Do you understand me?" The boy, terrified, nodded and fled. Jasmine moved on autopilot, fetching the weapons, her movements stiff and jerky. She handed the rifle to Clay and clutched the peacemaker its weight, feeling alien in her hand now. "They'll circle the house first, test the defenses," Clay said, his mind working with the cold precision of a seasoned fighter. "Jericho will try the back. Bo will come to the front door. He likes to talk first." He peered through the window. "Stay away from the windows. Get behind the big cabinet." He pointed to the heavy oak piece of furniture against the far wall. As they took their positions, the riders arrived, slowing their horses to a walk as they circled the small homestead. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of hooves on gravel and the frantic beating of Jasmine's heart. Then, a smooth, confident voice called out. "Clay Corrigan, I know you're in there. Come on out, son. We have business to discuss. No need for the lady to be involved in our little disagreement." It was Bo Garrett. His voice was just as Clay had described it, charming, reasonable, and utterly chilling. Clay remained silent, his rifle steady. "Don't be rude, Clay." Garrett's voice held a theatrical sigh. "I've come a long way, and I see you've made yourself quite at home. I must say I'm disappointed. I always thought you had better taste than a dusty widow on a failing patch of dirt." Jasmine flinched as if struck. The casual cruelty of the remark ignited a spark of pure hot rage within her. This man, this monster who had ordered her husband's death, was insulting her on her own land. "All right." The Baron's voice lost its pleasant edge. "Jericho, see if the back door is more welcoming." Clay looked at Jasmine, his eyes conveying a silent command. "Get ready." Seconds later, the sound of heavy boots crunched on the dirt behind the house. A massive shoulder slammed against the back door. The wood groaned, but held. It slammed again harder this time, and the frame splintered. "Now!" Clay yelled. He fired the rifle through the front window, the explosion deafening in the small room. The shot wasn't aimed to kill. It was a distraction. It made the third rider, who was holding the horses, dive for cover. At the back, Jasmine, fueled by rage and terror, did as Clay had taught her. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. As the back door burst open and Jericho's massive frame filled the doorway, she raised the Colt with both hands, squeezed the trigger, and fired. The bullet caught the big man high in the chest, staggering him backward with a look of pure surprise on his face. He collapsed in the dirt, clutching the wound. From the front, Beau Garrett cursed, drawing his own pair of ornate silver-inlaid revolvers. So the little mouse has claws. Fine, we'll do this the hard way. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the thin adobe walls, sending plaster and dust flying. Jasmine and Clay were pinned down, firing back sporadically. Clay was a master, making every shot count, forcing Garrett and his remaining man to stay behind the cover of the well. "We can't stay in here," Clay yelled over the din. "He'll set the house on fire." He looked around frantically, his eyes landing on the fireplace. "The chimney I can get on the roof, get a better angle." He scrambled to the hearth, using the rough stones as handholds to pull himself up into the dark, narrow space. Jasmine was left alone, crouched behind the cabinet, the heavy Colt bucking in her hands as she fired at any movement she saw through the shattered window. Fear was a living thing inside her, but the thought of Daniel hiding under his bed kept her from falling apart. She was no longer just a widow. She was a mother defending her cub. Clay emerged onto the roof, covered in soot, just as Garrett's man was making a run for the side of the house, a lit torch in his hand. Clay took aim and fired. The man dropped the torch and fell, clutching his leg. Now it was just the Baron. Beau Garrett, seeing his men down and his plan in ruins, abandoned all pretense of charm. He let out a roar of frustration and charged the front door, firing both pistols, a whirlwind of lead and fury. Clay scrambled across the roof, trying to get a clear shot. Jasmine, seeing Garrett in the doorway, fired the last bullet from Liam's Colt. The shot went wide, but it made Garrett duck back for a split second. It was the opening Clay needed. As Beau Garrett straightened up, Clay fired the rifle from the edge of the roof. The bullet hit Garrett in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped one of his pistols, his handsome face contorted in a snarl of pain and rage. He looked up and saw Clay on the roof, a dark angel of vengeance. "You betraying snake!" Garrett screamed, raising his remaining pistol. But Clay was already working the lever action of the rifle. He fired again. The second shot was true. It struck Beau Garrett in the center of his chest, right where the silver brocade vest was prettiest. The Baron's eyes went wide, a look of final, indignant surprise on his face. He stumbled backward, tripped over his own feet, and fell into the dust of the yard he had so arrogantly planned to conquer. He did not move again. A ringing silence descended upon the Broken Spur ranch, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded man by the side of the house. It was over. Clay slid from the roof, landing hard. He ran to the wounded man and kicked the gun away from his hand. Then he stood, breathing heavily, and looked at the carnage in the yard. He turned and saw Jasmine standing in the doorway, her face pale, her dress smudged with dirt and gunpowder, Liam's empty pistol still clutched in her hand. They stared at each other across the blood-soaked yard, the bodies of their shared past lying between them. The battle was won, but the war for what was left of their souls had only just begun. The aftermath of the gunfight was a surreal tableau of quiet violence under the harsh afternoon sun. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the coppery scent of blood. For a long moment, Jasmine and Clay simply stood, separated by the wreckage of the battle, the silence between them as profound as the noise that had preceded it. Then from the house, a small voice called, "Mama, Danielle." The sound broke the spell. Jasmine dropped the heavy Colt as if it had burned her and rushed back inside her heart, aching with a fierce, protective love. She found her son huddled under his bed, trembling but unharmed. She pulled him out and held him, murmuring reassurances she didn't feel herself. When she emerged again, Clay had tied up the remaining outlaw, whose leg wound was bleeding sluggishly into the dirt. Sheriff Brody was riding up the track, a cloud of dust in his wake, no doubt drawn by the sound of the prolonged gunfire. With him was Finn McAllister, his face a grim, anxious mask. Sheriff Brody took in the scene, with a practiced, weary eye, 2 bodies, 1 wounded man, and the bullet-pocked walls of the O'Connell house. "Jasmine," he breathed, swinging down from his horse. "Are you and the boy all right?" "We are," she said, her voice hollow. Brody's gaze fell on Clay. "I'm guessing you're the man Beau Garrett was looking for." Clay nodded slowly. "My name is Cole Corrigan." The confession hung in the air. Finn's face hardened. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew the name. "I should arrest you right now," Brody said, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "He saved us." Jasmine said, her voice quiet but firm. "If it wasn't for him, Daniel and I would be dead." "That man," she pointed a trembling finger at Garrett's body. "He's the one who killed Liam." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. Finn looked from Jasmine to Clay, a dawning understanding on his face. Clay looked at Brody, his expression devoid of any hope for mercy. "She's telling the truth about Garrett, and she's telling the truth that I helped, but I'm still who I am. I was a member of his gang. I was there the day her husband was killed. I'm not asking for a pardon, Sheriff. I'm just telling you the facts." His brutal honesty was more compelling than any lie. Brody looked at the bullet holes in the house, at the dead outlaws, and at the fierce, protective way Jasmine O'Connell stood, even now, in the same yard as the man who had helped destroy her life. The law was clear, but justice out here in the dust was often a murkier thing. "The man you wounded is talking," Brody said gruffly. "He's telling me about a stolen army payroll. He seems to think you know where it is." Clay's gaze flickered to Jasmine. This was his last card, his only chance at redemption. "I do," he said. He walked over to the water trough, knelt and pried a loose stone from its base. From the hollow space behind it, he pulled a small oilskin-wrapped package. He walked back and handed it, not to the sheriff, but to Jasmine. "It's all there," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "The map, the location. It's more money than you can imagine. Enough to hire a dozen hands to buy a new herd to dig a new well. Enough to make the Broken Spur the ranch Liam always dreamed it would be." She stared at the package in her hand, then up at his face. This was his penance. Blood money meant to wash away the stain of her husband's death. "I won't be needing it," Clay said, turning to face Sheriff Brody. He slowly unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall to the ground. He raised his hands. "I'm ready to go." Jasmine watched as Sheriff Brody put the cuffs on Clay. She watched as he was helped onto the back of a horse, his face grim, his shoulders slumped. As they prepared to ride away, Clay's eyes found hers one last time. In them she saw no plea for help, no expectation of forgiveness. She saw only a profound, bottomless regret and the quiet fulfillment of a vow. He had made her safe. He had stood between her and what came. And now he was paying the price. He had never tried to make her his in body, she realized. He had sworn to make her his to protect. It was a knight's pledge from a devil's mouth, and he had honored it to the bitter end. Finn McAllister walked over to her, his face full of a sorrow that mirrored her own. "Jasmine," he began. I'm sorry." She just nodded, unable to speak, clutching the oilskin map in one hand and her son's small hand in the other. She watched the posse ride away, taking Cole Corrigan towards a rope or a prison cell. He never looked back. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, across the bodies of the dead men, and across the ashes of what her life had been. She was safe. She was wealthy. She was alone. The outlaw was gone, but his ghost and the impossible, tangled legacy of his debt would haunt the Broken Spur forever. And so the story of Jasmine O'Connell and the outlaw Clay Corrigan comes to a close, not with a happy ending, but with the stark, complicated truth of the West. She was left with a prosperous future built on a foundation of blood money, and he rode towards a justice that was both deserved and tragic. Theirs was a tale of mercy and murder, of a debt that could never be truly repaid, and a vow that was honored in the most unexpected way. It reminds us that the line between hero and villain is often just a trick of the light, and that sometimes the greatest acts of love and redemption are born from the deepest sins. What would you have done in her place? Could you forgive a man who was party to your greatest loss, even if he became your salvation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of the raw and unforgiving frontier captured your imagination, please give this video a like, share it with fellow history and drama lovers, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true-life tales from the Wild West.